All right. So, yeah, so like I was saying earlier, we're going to go over a lot of like the class structure. I know I have it in the announcement, but just in case, and I'm going to try to keep it brief. So hopefully it's not too redundant. Um, Kind of just some of the structure of the class. So let me actually come here because let's just take a look at the module. And I guess while I'm bringing up week one module, um, a couple of, I guess, broader things. If you haven't seen in the announcement, um, kind of the welcome announcement, I do accept late work. It's one of the bigger things, I guess, that I like to announce. So if something happens in your life, because I get it happens, that's why we take online classes, right? If something happens, just let me know. My rule, I like to treat the class as if it were in the workplace. So just like if you were gonna miss a deadline for your boss, the kind of what I ask is just let me know as soon as possible, beforehand, preferably. So I get accidents happen. So obviously, if you're sitting in the hospital with an emergency, don't worry about sending me a message. But but if you're planning on having a baby, getting married, or whatever, just give me a heads up, and more than happy to accept that late work. And I'll accept it, for emergencies. Just let me know if something's going on. Really, I guess what I ask is for good communication. So, and on that note, if you're not on the teams, I highly recommend it. There's a link in the announcement there as well for the teams chat. Um, I read everything, but I am active all day, every day on Teams. So if you want to get a hold of me quickly, Teams is the best way to go. And the best part about it is other students can interact as well. So if I don't get to it, maybe the TA will, and if the TA doesn't get to it, maybe another student will beat us both to it. So it seems to work really, really well. Um, Okay, so one other thing that I want to mention, the textbook is available for free if you haven't found that out already. Textbook is available for free from Safari Books Online. Now, I'm not a big fan of the Safari book, so I actually just bought a copy myself, um, because I just don't like to have to like log in every time and worry about all that. So I just bought one, but whichever works for you, feel free to do so. Um, as far as the weekly class structure, basically every week you're going to have week one's a little different. So I'm actually going to skip to week two. We're going to do some reading. We have optional discussion, which is completely optional. Honestly, I kind of just use Teams for it. So most of the time, the discussion isn't even used. I prefer it to be in Teams, but completely optional. And then we have an exercise, a quiz, and a paper. So basically, each week you're going to have some reading and prep, an exercise, a quiz, and a paper. And really, they're not too hard. And what I really like about it is there's a lot of overlap between them. So I tell students every semester what I would kind of recommend is obviously start with the reading. But what I would do is I would actually like click on the paper. So like let's take a look. We'll just use week one as an example, because I'm a big fan of like letting the assignments kind of guide your studies in a way, because the assignments are there to kind of do that. So in the paper, if we kind of take a look at this, basically the key of the paper is to write a 3 to 5 paragraph report that explains while using the command line shell has advantages that translate to productivity, and the difference between using an integrated development environment and a command line interface. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute, more in depth. But what I like to do is, okay, so now I kind of have some context about like what the focus is for this week. And for week one, it's very exploratory. So then what I would do is take a look at like the preparation and reading, and we can kind of go through here. And this one's a little bit more as far as links go. Now you don't have to click on all these. Like I said, you can kind of let the assignment do your guide. This course is very much off rails in a way, because the bulk of our work is in those papers, and the papers are very open ended. So you can kind of feel free to explore as you will. So what I would kind of do is always start with the PowerPoint slides. So that's where I would go next. So if I click on these PowerPoint slides, and kind of just preview them here. These will give you a very nice overview of the chapter. I think they're a very good summary. Obviously not all of it's there, but very good summary. And so I would really take a lot of time with these PowerPoints and use those as kind of like the launch pad for the learning. And I don't know if there's a way to hide that now. Oh, right there. So yeah, take a look at those PowerPoints. And then what I would do is I actually wouldn't really dig into the other stuff unless it's like, whoa, that's fuzzy, or, oh, there's more on the paper about that, or I just want to learn more, or, maybe when it comes time when we're taking the quiz, uh, it's a little shaky and we want to expand on it. Or the exercises. The exercise will be good. Then I would click on some of these other ones, and you'll see that, like, here's the how to install it for Windows, how to use it, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the preparation and reading. So just to reiterate, I would start by checking out the paper, then doing the PowerPoints and the reading. Then I would hit the exercises and then do the quiz last, because the exercises are going to be, there can be some multiple choice, but a lot of them are going to be open-ended, like practice queries, or like in this case, it's going to ask you, did you install things? So just stuff like that. So basically build up to the quiz, and the quizzes aren't super difficult. They're open book, open notes. So yeah, there's really not a lot of stress around the quizzes either. The reason I would say just hold off on the quiz is because they're just a quiz, So I would just do everything leading up to the quiz. And then by the time you get to the quiz, I don't think you'll actually need to do much, if any, studying or looking up in the book while you're taking the quiz, which will be efficient. So that's kind of the recommended structure, so to speak. And I'm going to pause there. Does anyone have any questions or concerns relating to that before we start diving into what a paper should look like, and then we actually get to the fun stuff of actually starting to look at MySQL?
I do have one quick question. So I was looking through all the links and whatnot, and so the PowerPoint has a different tutorial of how to install MySQL versus the tutorial video. So in instances like that, should we defer to the PowerPoint as like the best way that we should go about doing that, or just kind of look at all the options and decide?
And really, like, as far as installing MySQL, um, that's probably going to be the only case where they really differ. And that's probably just because they probably just pulled it from two sources. Ultimately, it should be the same, and really the process should be very, very like seamless. Like, really, it's like, I don't know, like I kind of equate it to installing a video game. You kind of just
Mhm.
install it and it goes. Um, the only ones that are a little bit weird is Macs, because they actually don't have Mac instructions built in. As many have already commented, they don't have great Mac instructions kind of built in here, which I kind of just handle that as they go, because the difficulty with Mac now is are you on ARM or on the older Intel? And so I usually just handle those case by case. I do have one of each though. So I actually am running on Linux. I have a Mac. I also have Windows installed. So I can handle all of them. So if you get stuck, just let me know. But ultimately that installation process should be really seamless. You can even find a guide you can Google it. Really the most important thing is making sure you have the right links to download, which I'm going to show those to you right now, actually.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because really, like I said, it's just a matter of downloading it and installing it. It's really pretty simple. So if you Google MySQL downloads, you go to mysql.com and then click the download tab. Basically, we're going to download the community one. And this is actually a great opportunity to talk about some of the different databases. So we're going to be using MySQL in the class, but really we're learning the SQL language, which can be used across a wide variety of database brands. So basically MySQL is a product. It's not a specific language unto itself necessarily. It's just one product. So a couple of the other big names, we have Oracle, which was kind of like the first, and they're kind of like the big dog in the fight, or traditionally, they're huge. So like the NSA runs on Oracle. Then we have Microsoft SQL Server, which is another big one. And then Postgres is another, that's a free one that's very feature rich. And so all these different varieties are actually using SQL. So like you could, even though we're learning MySQL in the class, you could jump over to Microsoft SQL Server very easily. There's just a few little quirks here and there, but that's going to be anytime you switch, brands. So really we're learning the SQL language. But along those lines, the reason we're using MySQL is because it's free. So the enterprise edition is not free. The cluster version is not free, as you can see by the trial downloads. So we actually use the community edition, which is the open source edition. And once we click on here, you can see a bunch of different options here. So what we'll need is we will need the server, the shell, and the workbench. So what I would do is I would start by installing the server. And so when we click on this, we're going to get a lot of different options here. Now, mine is Linux because that's what I'm on, and I'm actually running on an offshoot of Ubuntu. But like, so for example, if I was going to be using Windows, I would download the 64-bit zip archive. If I'm on Mac, we have to choose between ARM. So if you have a newer Mac that is on an M1 chip, you'll want to use the ARM. If you are on an Intel Mac, you'll probably want to use the 64-bit. And actually, it looks like they've combined them now. That used to be different. Okay, it looks like they combined them. So you can actually just download this and, oh wait, no, I think you'll want, no, they are still separate. Sorry, I was looking at the 64-bit. So if you're on ARM, you'll want to download this one, the ARM 64. If you're on Intel, you'll want to do the x86 64. And then from there, it's actually just basically double click on it, go through the install process like normal. Let's go back, and shell is the same thing. Just download the correct one for your operating system and architecture. And then finally for workbench. And workbench, it looks like they only have an x86. If you're on ARM though, you should still be able to make it work by running it through Rosetta. And I'm hoping that people know how to do that. I don't have an M1 Mac. I'm still on the Intel for reasons like this, but you should be able to right click on it and say like open with compatibility or open with Rosetta, something along those lines. And like I said, if something happens, just let me know, because I can always assist through that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, so that should be, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. The installation process is super simple. Now, where it gets a little bit more tricky, not tricky, but a lot of people have a hard time kind of understanding the relationship between the three things. So if we download the server, we download the shell, and we download Workbench, we kind of have three things going on. And so I kind of want to go over that real quick. So let me make sure I'm running on mine. Sudo service MySQL status. Let's make sure we're running. Okay, so basically, traditionally, databases are ran on servers because we want them accessible to a wide variety of clients. So for example, we might have an app that is using the REST API, or we might have a analytics warehouse that is using it to power reports and dashboards and so on and so forth. So databases, we want them accessible. So they're usually running on a server. So what we're doing is when you download the MySQL server, you're actually basically going to host the database on your own computer. And so it's actually going to run on your computer. Normally that's done on an external machine. So basically I can see that my server is active and running here. Basically, MySQL is running on my computer, which basically when you start your computer, it should start automatically, kind of just sits there in the background and you can talk to it. When we go to connect, so if I open up MySQL Workbench, we can have a variety of connections. So MySQL Workbench is an integrated development environment, or graphical user interface, GUI. I usually just call them a GUI. And it allows us to connect to MySQL databases, but it's many as we want. So you can see that I actually have 4 different connections here. They're actually all connecting to the same thing, just in a little different way. But let's go here and edit this connection. So if I was going to make a new connection, I hit this little plus button, and this is where we can give it a name and tell where we want it to go. So I'm just going to say this is my home tower, and it is running on localhost. All this should be pretty much default. So 127.0.0.1. When you install MySQL, it should have you set a root password. That's important. If you forget the root password, the easiest way is actually just to uninstall it and reinstall it. So you want to set your root password good, so you can have it. Now I've set up myself another user, so I'm going to go ahead and connect with it. So I'm going to test this connection. It's going to ask me for my password. My password for here, School Rocks. And you can see that I successfully made the MySQL connection. So now that I've made the connection, I can go ahead and add that connection. And that's how I can connect to the server running on the same computer. So normally, I would connect to some computer sitting on a server rack in San Francisco or some data center somewhere. But in this case, we're just going to run locally on our own computers. And this is MySQL Workbench. Now, let's do the same thing with the terminal. So to connect with the terminal, I just use the MySQL command or MySQL shell. So if you can run MySQL shell or MySQL. And then I'm just going to connect. I'm going to say -u and put in my username here, and then a -p to say, oh, I want to use my password. Oh, let's go do School Rocks here. And there we go, I'm connected. So that's kind of the 2 different ways to connect. The other way, so if you want a shortcut, and I know I've mentioned this a few times, for as little as we will probably be using the command line interface, I would almost recommend this. If you right click on your connection, there's an option to start command line client, and you can click that and it will actually open up your prompt for you. And let me see if I can type my password right here. There we go. 3rd time's a charm. So that's a little shortcut to actually start it for you. So that way, if you have alias issues or whatever else, you can do that. And honestly, most of the time we're going to be inside Workbench. So unless you're planning on really using the command line, I would say just plan on right clicking until you maybe feel like, oh, I'm using this a lot, and we can do the other. Any questions up to that point? And feel free to stop me along the way if I ever go too fast or if there's something you want me to stop at.
So you said if we have like the version 8.0, we don't need to re-download it for 8.0.21, right?
No. Yep, you should be good. Yeah, the little versions won't matter, and honestly, it might change. Just yeah. So once you have MySQL, it should be good. I would say as long as you're on MySQL 8 or above, you should be good, because I know there are a couple changes below 8. All right, so that's oh, go ahead.
I was just saying thank you.
Oh, sure. Yep, no problem. All right, so that covers a lot of the installation processes. And what I found is, like I said, for the most part, it just works. This part, some people usually get confused at if I don't explain it. So hopefully that makes sense, that really we're connecting to basically another service. And MySQL Workbench doesn't care if it's locally on our computer or if it's in the cloud somewhere. It doesn't care as long as, all the parameters are correct. So if you run into problems, the best thing to do is just let me know, and we can work through those, because most of the time they're little quirky things anyways. All right, let's go now to the paper. So the paper, like I said, back in detail. So now we've actually seen the command line and the GUI, or the IDE is what they kind of call it. So for week 1, really, we're going to talk about the difference between the two. But what I like to do is kind of show an example. So I kind of have, I wrote a paper, a version of this for myself, to kind of show kind of, I guess, ideal state, what's expected. So 3 to 5 paragraphs. This is kind of what I would consider not quite bare minimum, because obviously depending on, but kind of like where I would set my bar for expectation. And you can do this in any format you want. I do not care about MLA format. I don't care about anything, like I don't care if tabs are indented, all that kind of stuff. Basically, I just ask you make it professional. I've had people that actually write their papers on their blog, on their website. That works for me. They just send a link of their post or whatever. Whatever works for you. But what I would recommend is, it at least needs to be 3 to 5 paragraphs. And what I would recommend is throw in a couple screenshots every week. Because really the idea of these papers are to let you, the papers are the bulk of this, and they're to let you kind of explore it on your own, so to speak. And I think it really helps. So just as a little, I actually first kind of encountered this kind of stuff when I was doing my graduate program. And I really liked it, because instead of having, all this kind of laid out, I mean, we kind of give you a specific prompt to give you in a direction, but there's no specific right answer, no specific outcome, no specific points you necessarily need to hit. And at first I didn't like it, because I was always wondering, like, oh, did I do it right? And, and you didn't know till you got graded. But I can assure you that, like, if you just write it, odds are it's going to be fine. I'm not very picky when it comes to the papers, as long as, I can tell when there's effort and when there's not. And that's really what I care about. So what I kind of prefer is, obviously 3 paragraphs. So that's what I have here is three paragraphs. And I've thrown in a couple of screenshots, and from week to week, you'll find that the screenshots are actually going to be really easy to add, because most of the time we're doing things. And that's why I always say, take a look at the paper, because, all it would take is, a lot of the exercises, you were actually going to be writing some test queries, and you can screenshot those, or there's examples in the book that are great, and you can actually screenshot those. So lots of things you can do. And to me, the screenshots are like anything, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So, what I would say is, like, for me, when I wrote this, I kept my actual words to what I would consider minimal. Like, so as far as a paragraph, this is 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences. So probably 3 to 4 sentences per paragraph is kind of like where I'm at, which I think is pretty good definition of a meaty paragraph. And then, so 3 paragraphs of about that length plus, a screenshot or 2, I think is just about right. And again, there's no right answer. I actually really like this. Even I liked it as a student, and I actually like grading them, because it's really fun to to see different perspectives. And like I said, there's no right answer. And if you do make some misinterpretation of the content, I try to find those and like point them out so I can be like, well, actually it works like this, but you won't get docked for that. Really, the paper is just to let you explore on your own. And basically you're graded on the content, or the quality, not necessarily the right answer. Does anyone have any questions about the papers? All right, perfect. And there is a rubric, but anyways, let's see. I think that's it. Does anyone have any questions in general about just like the course structure before? Let's see, because it's 6:30. Does anyone have any questions about what we've covered thus far? Before I do a real quick kind of dive into some, just to help you with your papers, we'll do a couple quick commands in the terminal just so we can see them. Okay, I'll take that silence as we are good. So I guess real quick, and I'll do this kind of both ways so we can kind of see some different stuff. So what we're going to be dealing with is our Sequila database. And when you install that, there should be an option to install it. If it gets missed for whatever reason, we can always download it and install the Sequila database separately. But when you install it, there should be an option to say, get the Sequila test data. If it doesn't ask you, it should be there by default. If it's not, let me know. Because I do have like a set of instructions for how to get that. But when we're exploring our schema, which is our database, the graphical interface is actually really nice because I can actually go to my Sequila database and take a look at all the tables here and then see actually the columns in that table, which is really nice. So like, especially for beginners or people unfamiliar with the database, it's really nice to kind of see this like all laid out in a nice, neat way. To show you the command line version of that, let's see right here. -u. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm executing the command MySQL. I'm going to use the -u to denote my username, and then -p to say I'm going to provide a password. I don't type the password yet, but I'm going to provide one. And the other thing that gets a lot of people is even though you don't see it typing, it's working. It doesn't show you for security reasons. Okay, so if we take a look, we want to first see, so let's show databases. Let's see what databases I have here locally. Now, because I'm connected to the same database, the list here is actually the same. So we have our Sequila database, which is the one we're going to use in class. So I'm going to use Sequila. And when I say use Sequila, that kind of denotes that when I run commands, it tells the database like, oh, apply this to this specific database. Because believe it or not, we have a database server running. We have MySQL running on this, but we can have multiple databases within that one instance, if that makes sense. So we are going to use the Sequila database, which is a movie rental database. And let's take a look at the tables in there. So I'm going to run show tables, add a semicolon here, and I'm actually going to see if I can make this a little bigger here for us. There we go. So show tables, this was a command I just ran. And if you miss a semicolon, so show tables, if I don't type a semicolon, if you get these little arrows, it just means that you're missing a semicolon and it's treating it all as like one command. So just add a semicolon and then hit enter and it'll run it for you. So we can see our list of tables. And so now if I wanted to see a list of columns, like for example, customer, I can use the describe customer command, or if you want a shortcut, just DESC customer. And here we can see that this is the table. So these are all the columns in the table. So we have a customer ID, store ID, first name, last name, email, address ID active, so on and so forth. We can see the data type for those, which we'll talk about in the future, and other information. So these commands should get you started. So really show databases, use a database, show tables, describe a table. That should get you started for this week. We will definitely talk about more in the future. And you may come across more in your reading. Feel free to try those out if you like as well. When you're all done, depending on if you're using MySQL Shell or MySQL, you'll either do a /Q to quit, or you can just type quit. So if I wanted to go back here. Oh, go ahead.
I just had a question about like capitalization. Reading the book, it seemed like, I mean, he was capitalizing different things, whatever, but it doesn't necessarily matter. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. So the capitalization in the commands don't matter, but you'll find that basically the best practice, and you'll see me do this because I personally like it, even when it's not best practice, is basically any SQL word, syntax word. I
Like a command.
capitalize. Yep, I capitalize those, and then like any variable, column name, table name type stuff, I don't. So and that to me just kind of like helps like parse the query mentally, I think, is why they do it, because it's really easy to find the pieces of the command as we get more into it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, great question. As far as when it comes to command line, I get way less picky about capitalization simply because it really only exists in the command line. So like, for example, if I wanted to select everything from customer in the command line, a lot of times I'll just type it all lowercase. Simply because I don't want to have to worry about it as much, but really you can do it either way. So yep, capitalization does not matter. And I don't dock if you choose to do it all lowercase at all, completely up to you. Because honestly, there's a lot of debate, even amongst the people who do this for a living. It gets weird. So for example, MySQL and some of those, like their preferred documentation is to uppercase the syntax like we've shown. But for whatever reason, a lot of people in the Postgres community don't, and I couldn't tell you why, but that's kind of what happens. Great question. But anyways, does anyone else have any other questions? All right, well, those commands should get you started. And yeah, it should get you started for the week. Really, this week is all about just getting everything set up and ready. That's priority number one. And kind of just exploring what, becoming familiar. Don't worry about breaking too much. You really can't break a lot that we can't fix. So feel free to explore, and if you have any questions, any roadblocks, or any questions about really anything, feel free to shoot me a message or ping me on Teams. More than happy to help. But otherwise, if you don't have any other questions, have a great week and good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.